What's up, everybody? This is Army 2 Willis. I stumbled on something that I wanted to share with you guys. You know, everybody's talking about what you can see and frame rates and motion blur and what effects they actually have for you in the game. So I want to show you guys what I came across. Here you see 60 FPS, which is this top spear, and 120 FPS, which is the bottom spear. Obviously, if you're watching this, you'll see that one is moving and looks a lot clearer than the other that has this blur going on, if you see what I mean. Now, if we change this 60 to 30, you see even more. With the realistic motion blur, it doesn't look any better. If we make it heavier, it still doesn't look better. We make it even heavier, it gets worse, it gets worse, and it's just a jittery mess. It looks like it's moving extremely fast, but it's not really helping it. Now if we do the same here, it looks more realistic with the motion blur on it at the bottom. Looks like it's just moving really fast and we're having a hard time keeping up with it. Where if we have no motion blur at all, you see the effects that happen there. Now we're going to try something. We're going to bring this up to 24 frames, which is what you see on TV. You see it's a jittery mess. If we take it off, you see there's all kinds of stuttering going on. It doesn't look very good. So we'll put the realistic back on. Now let's jump up to 2,000 pixels. You see what it looks like now? We'll jump up to 2,000 pixels here as well. Pixels per second. This looks like it's bouncing, and this is just a jittery mess. So let's heavy it. Bring it down to 2. We'll bring it down to 50 as well. And you see that stutter effect right there between the two of them. At 24 frames, that's a serious stutter effect. Now we're going to bring it up to 30 frames. You can still see the difference between the stutter effect at 30 frames per second compared to the 60 frames per, the 120 frames per second. You can even see the difference between 60 frames per second. It's not as noticeable, but you can still tell there's a stutter with this one over that one. Where the real difference comes in is when you get to 120 and 60. This one appears to have a smoother, like some people, especially if you don't play video games, you're not going to notice the difference that I'm talking about here. But there's a smoother glide across the screen here versus the slight stutter that's noticeable there. Most people who play video games on a console or who just watch TV, you're probably not going to notice. People that watch TV are probably not going to notice any difference here at all. The people that play video games on a console, to them, they're going to appear to be moving exactly the same. But the people that play video games at high refresh rates on PC, they're going to see an obvious difference between these two. They're moving with the same amount of pixels per second here, but there's still a stutter. Now, we're going to up the pixels. And as you up the pixels, it becomes more noticeable. Can you see the stutter more now? Let's bring it up to 500 and see if you guys can notice the stutter. Now, this got heavy motion blur. Let's bring it down and see if you guys can see the difference then. We'll bring it down to 200 each. You see it? Now, this is 60. This is 120. 60, 120. You can still see the object even though it's moving and the background is moving because you naturally will blur out anything that you're not looking at with your vision. But when you follow the other ball still feels blurry even when you're watching it. Now we'll bring it down again. Some of you probably don't notice the difference. You probably like, one just looks lighter or darker. Makes no difference. Here, you almost don't see a difference. But we're talking about games. Games, for some games might be like this. 60 FPS, 50 pixels a second, looks fine. 120 FPS, 100 pixels per second, looks great. But if we had 120 FPS with 100 pixels, how would that look? Or 60 with 100 pixels. Now let's look at 30 with 100 pixels. The blur kicks in a lot harder there, doesn't it? 48. It clears up. It clears up more. And then for those of you with those 75 hertz panels, that's where it gets right about to the point where they appear the same to me personally when I'm looking at it. They look like they're about the same in clarity now. Once I hit that 90 FPS to 120 FPS, when it gets within 30 of each other, I can't really tell the difference. But of course, your frames per second can go much higher than this. You can have 240 frames per second. The refresh rates in hertz can also affect this greatly too, causing you to see something of a higher clarity with something that has a higher hertz. And I'm going to explain that in a second because a lot of people have that misconstrued. But I just want you to see the difference because right now we're just looking at the sunset. When we switch to autumn and we switch these frame rates around, now, I'm curious if you guys can see the blur now with a different background behind us that this ball has over that one. This one still appears clear while the 60 does not. Now let's say this is at 60, the background. See how there's like a blur around the object? We'll bring that to 200 pixels per second too. Bet you guys can't see it. But as you see here, this is a neat little tool for you guys to mess around with it so you can see it like one-to-one instead of watching it over a screen with me. So you can really just see the difference between the frames per second, the motion blur, and the velocity of whatever's moving around in the background. You guys can just get an idea of what that's like. Like if that's 100, or we got 120 FPS, you guys can really get a feel for what this stuff looks like. It can be pretty bad, especially depending on what the background is. I'm just gonna range through a bunch of these to give you guys an idea. Change some stuff around. You know, 60 versus 30, 90 versus 60, 120 versus 60, 120 versus 90, 120 versus 30, 120 versus 48, 120 versus 24. This is like what movies normally look like right here. That's just a jittery mess. Action scenes. That doesn't look too good. Normally, you shouldn't see anything like this. Like if you're playing a game and it's that bad, that's horrible. Like imagine you're trying to shoot this, but you can't even tell it's moving just like this, but it appears like it's stuttering because of how slow it is compared to everything else moving around it. Like that's horrible. You can't shoot that. Like if I'm shoot boom, but where it actually is here because it looks like it's in both places at once, there's where you miss. There's that latency that we're talking about. That's horrible. Look at that. You've seen it. I'm sure everybody here has seen what that looks like in a game. That's horrible. Just horrible. That's bad. It gets better here, but that's still bad. I don't know what the difference between 24 and 25. To my eye, I see no difference between the two. 30 looks a lot more clear than 24 or 25, but it's still pretty bad. When you get to 48, it starts to look a lot better, a lot smoother, but I can still see like this weird. It's not as bad as it was, but it still looks like it's vibrating the ball inside a tiny spot. When we get up to 60, I still see the vibrations. It's just ever so slight. And that's what you guys are not noticing. Like here with the 120, I don't see any vibration at all. It looks like a solid object just moving with movement going around in the background behind it. Whereas the top looks like it's got like this slight vibration or blur on the edges of the image as it's moving around. Almost as much as the vibration there. You see it now at 30. I'm sure a lot of you see it at 30. The rest of you are going to see it here at 25 and 24. 24, I guess it does vibrate a lot faster at 24 than it does at 25. Guess I just didn't notice it before. Not going up, I guess, but going down, you do. And then the rest will see it here and here, and everybody should be able to see that's just bad. But if we bring it up to here, you see at no point these balls are moving at almost the same speed at 90 and 120. This one's a little faster than that one, but as far as my eyes can tell, they appear to be about the same. I still see a slight blur, but the image looks mostly clear, even though there's a realistic motion blur going on in the background. They still look pretty good. If we put a heavier motion blur, I can see it a lot clearer here than here. We make the motion blur even heavier. It becomes even more apparent. It's like the more you add to the motion blur, the more you can see. So now this is really blurry. This one still appears clear. Let's do a heavy motion blur. This one's starting to look blurry now, but this one's like crazy blurry compared. And we'll bring it down to 60. Just look at that. Same amount of motion blur applied to the two images. And look how horrible that looks. Now, let's cut the motion blur off. See how this one looks like it's moving, but this one just looks like a still image on the camera moving back and forth? I don't really see a difference with the light. The realistic, somewhat, but with that heavy, it's pretty bad. Let's bring it down to like, look at that. It almost appears like the ball is spinning. And then it's just doing all kinds of crazy stuff there. Yeah, that's just something I wanted to show you guys. I don't know if you guys ever seen this website, but frames-per-second.appspot.com. And you guys can really just get in there and play with it and just get an idea of like what frame rates look like and what they mean in terms of movies, games, whatever it is you guys want to use it for. Anyway, this was Orbital Willis with just a quick video to show you guys that, and show you guys what I think, and kind of play with it with you guys for a little while and just get an idea. But take a look at it and post me some comments. This was Armor 2 Willis. Out.